So, if you're here, you probably have a general idea of what the Notes is about. I will not go through the whole spiel again. Maybe introduce it by giving a very personal take on this. So I work for Science Feedback. We're a fact-checking / disinformation research organization that specializes, among other things, in fact-checking claims claims that pretend to be based on science, especially around climate change. What we have learned doing this is that facts are not enough. This climate science is more or less settled. There are still some gray areas or some uncertainties, but we're very clear on basically what is disinformation and what is not. And yet we also know that there are many, many people that our fact checks will just never convince, never reach. There's mental barriers around whatever we say. So for these people, and there's many of them, we need a new approach, an approach that's more steeped in psychology. And that's exactly what we've been doing here at Notes with the fantastic colleagues from Reimagine. So without further ado, I'll pass the floor to Andrzej and Marcin to introduce the narrative methodology.
Okay, so I'm going to present our narrative, very shortly, our narrative approach to depolarize the public sphere discussion on the climate. So here, our essence is the narrative approach to depolarization. And really, this is based on the observation that we are trapped by our own narratives. And telling stories is an important part of being human. And really, the stories are the primary tools by which we experience the world. So the narratives are not only the tool of communication, they're also the tool that our cognitive system uses to understand the world. But narratives also have very important social consequences. They tell us who is our friends, who are our friends, and who are our enemies. So really, the narratives unite us and divide us. And in a polarized world, where polarizing narratives fill up the public sphere, instead of focusing on solving problems, each side is trying to defend its own narrative and undermine the narrative of others. And those involved in a polarized dispute feel that the conflict is irreconcilable and the divide is fundamental. But what we've seen is through our narrative analysis, and we have climate is just one of the cases where we apply our methodology, is that underneath very polarized narratives, people share a lot of common values and goals. And this is mainly narratives that divide them and sustain the conflict. In a way, to depolarize, we have to go beyond the narratives and look of what connects us, which are common values and common goals, and base our discussion on the commonalities rather than trying to concentrate on differences. So we want to focus on both content and the form of communication in our attempt to depolarize. And really, our goal is not to decide, is not to judge, but rather to facilitate dialogue. So we are not trying to push any solution, but rather to enable people to talk. Because in a very polarized society, basically the constructive discussion is nearly impossible. So our goal in our narrative and analysis of the climate, which is part of the NOS project, our goal is to identify and understand main narratives shaping the public debate on climate change. And we also want to look at what are the values behind each narrative. Our sources is systemic qualitative analysis and annotation of, and here we use two different corpora of texts. So to define to understand what are the main narratives, we analyzed 1,500 long blog posts and news articles from sources representing different clusters of the debate, and science feedback has helped us to identify the sources, which are mainstream media, scientific communication, post identified as the information communication of NGOs in 4 different languages: Polish, Spanish, French, and English. And the traditional view of the climate discussion is that really there are 2 camps: climate skeptics and climate activists. Okay, our analysis allowed us to go beyond this view, and we discovered 7 qualitatively different narratives. Okay, so we are here want to present a more nuanced approach, which really tells us that on the left-hand side you can see the narratives that are usually characterized as climate skeptic. On the right-hand side, you can see narratives that usually are associated with climate activism. In between them, there is a narrative that somehow, connects these two different sides. So the first narrative is we need to resist the green dystopia. The second one is green policies are blocking progress. These 2 narratives assume that are very skeptical about climate change measures, and the first they slightly differ. They differ in how they portray the climate change and the actions that are supposed to moderate climate change. Then there is also the third debate: is let's not panic. This may acknowledge, well, maybe some climate change is happening, but let's not panic. Let's take appropriate measures. Let's not try to make the measures more painful than the problem. In between them, then we have a narrative that that acknowledges, there is an important and really dangerous climate change. However, we can use this as an opportunity to grow, especially we can solve it through technological solution. And basically, really, if we look at this is just a change and on which we can really benefit. Fifth one is simply the apocalypse is coming. The sixth one is rebellion against greed, so which stresses that it's mainly overconsumption that is the problem of climate change. And the seventh one is really kind of a very optimistic, is one thing. Well, we need to act together. Every small action counts. If we all act together, then we'll be able to deal with the problem. So here, if you look at I'll just present, in more detail 2 narratives. The first one, we need to resist the green dystopia. And this is really says, that green activists driven by obsession want to turn our words upside down. They ban everything we cherished, and they want to control every aspect of our life. Okay. And then they're critical. You can read the rest. We must resist the green dystopia, break free from the tyranny of the madmen, and take back control of our lives. Okay. Then we can see that there are also very specific images which we usually call a mood board associated with this narrative, which are basically the metaphor of the emerge of control and manipulation, presentation of things that are disgusting, that you have to do or eat by adopting the measures. Showing climate activity as a terrorism, and highlighting the thing that we would lose if we adopt climate change mitigation measures. Okay, the second one, it may be, is narrative number 5, the apocalypse is coming. So this is simply our world is going to end soon. The signs of the apocalypse are already everywhere. It is time to panic. Okay. And if we look at the mood board, this is simply the images of global change, and that we have the final choice, graphs showing, how the climate change happens, images of the apocalypses, images of already occurring climate changes, and the graphs contrasting the world now and what we can lose the world after the climate catastrophe. Okay. Now, if we so far I've shown different contrasting narratives. However, if we look at the behind the narratives, we can see that there is a lot of common values connecting these narratives, which we call narrative bridges. So that actually different groups, although the narratives may be really very different for them, they hold and express the same values, and we can use these values to in our attempt to depolarization. So, for example, the link between narrative 1 and 5 is, for example, tradition, continuity, children, and security. So, although these two groups really, see each other, as being very much in conflict, there are many values on which both groups agree. Here I turn it to Marcin.
Thank you very much. So you're journalists, and from our point of view, you're the essential part of the machine here, because it's not enough to have great solutions and evidence-based climate policies if people are not going to adopt them. So there is this gap between what science know and what researchers established, and what actually will be acceptable to people. And our research indicates that actually there might be something worse than a gap, that there might be a very strong negative feedback between the alarmist tone of what we see as climate researchers and the harsh solutions we need to push, and the reaction of large group of audience that feel more and more marginalized by the climate debate and by the climate policy. So today, we would like to translate these results that Andrzej just shared with you into some debate on what we can actually do as scientists, researchers, climate communicators, and journalists to break this vicious circle. And our starting point is that for some very engaged climate journalists and scientists, it may look like polarization is actually a good thing because it makes things easier. We are right and they are wrong. There are two types of people: those who want to change the situation and save our planet, and those who obstruct it for different reasons. Well, from our narrative point of view, this is not true, because what actually happens is that by creating this very strong label of denialists or climate skeptics, we actually engage a very dangerous social mechanism. When we think about polarization and conformism, we all have this natural tendency to follow the group, and we have this strong need to belong somewhere. But when we are put in a situation when our identity is labeled as anti or as rebellious, this also may be a very attractive identity. So I've put these two circles here on a presentation to represent the mainstream and the group that either labeled itself or has been labeled as rebellious. This group is paradoxical because from our narrative point of view, it's obvious that there are a lot of differences between the people who for very different reason express their skepticism toward climate policies. But whenever we put them in one camp, we say denialists, we create a strong pressure for them to integrate and think alike. It has been very well documented in the case of vaccine hesitancy, that people who expressed very mild hesitancy towards vaccination and just wanted to ask questions, if they were labeled as anti-vaxxers and put in this camp with people who, for example, spread really crazy conspiracy theories, despite initially not having anything in common with those radical anti-vaxxers, they've been pushed by the mainstream, by their doctors very often, into this camp, and this created a very strong in-group pressure to make it more coherent. So the first step would be to acknowledge that polarization is our problem, and that people who may disagree with our preferred climate policies may do so and think so for many different reasons. So it all boils down to this main challenge or paradox that we have evidence-based policy or policies that is based on research, facts, and truth, which is non-negotiable. The climate is changing. It is changing because of what we as human race are doing, and it is changing in strong correlation with our emission of greenhouse gases. And no matter how strong we oppose to that and how many people would vote for this to be untrue, the physical reality is not going to change. But at the same time, as I've mentioned at the beginning of my intervention, it's not enough to have great effective solutions if people are not going to accept them. It's not enough to have better and better vaccines if people are hesitant, don't understand them, and are very skeptical towards that. So we need this second component. We need to acknowledge that we need some form of deliberative democracy when different values, different opinions has to be taken into account. And obviously, the question is not which one should we choose, but how can we have both? How can we communicate science in the way that we build public support for these effective solutions? So we have a lot of research, unfortunately, showing that the true-false criterion is not decisive for proliferation of information. The information spreads in social networks not because it's true, but because it's relevant and interesting. So we can do two things about that. Either say, okay, it's unfair, I hate you reality, and just step back into our laboratories, or we can think, what can we do for the truth, for the scientific evidences to be interesting and relevant for different audiences? How can we communicate them as such? And to bridge this gap, we are now experimenting with moving from thinking about narratives into seeing the people who are actually behind the narratives. When we say, well, there is narrative number 1, narrative number 2, narrative number 3, it is possible for scientists and communicators to say, okay, so our goal is to eliminate this narrative from discourse. When we understand that there are actual people behind the narratives, this line of thinking, fortunately, is not acceptable anymore. We cannot think about how to get rid of these people from the democratic system. We need to think, how can we find a place for them to live their values and worldviews while being part of the positive change. And we have created this different persona, each one representing one of the narratives Andrzej described to you. I would love to say something more about Elena, who believes that we need systemic solutions and need to be very organized, or about Giuseppe, who is a young gamer who says that we don't want to wait for the governments because they are always too slow. We need to take things in our hands. But today we only have time to present 2 of these personas. So let me very shortly introduce you to Wladek, who is my compatriot. He's also Polish. He's a former miner living in a small town, and he's a victim of green transformation. His mine was closed, and he, as well as his colleagues and a lot of family members, were fired. And something very important has been taken from them, something much more important than just salary. His tradition was taken from him. His lifestyle was taken from him. His pride was taken from him, because for many years, for generations actually, Władek and his family were very proud to be miners. They always thought that, well, we do this hard work for the benefit of the whole society. But then during the Green Transformation, they were just told, we don't need you anymore. Actually, you were never important. You were just this polluter old industry that we never actually needed. So now Władek repeats narrative number one. So he says, well, the world is changing very rapidly, and the reason for this change are stupid, radical green policies. They want to take from me everything I want. But now you see that Władek has a very good reason to believe what he believes. And on the other hand, let's look at Maria. Maria is a kind of person you may easily meet if you like walking in forests. She's there almost every day, either hiking or biking or kayaking with her family. And every day she encounters some new dramatic effects of climate change. The trees that used to grow in her local forests are now dying because of changing seasons, because of droughts, because of mild winter and extremely hot summer. New invasive species are appearing. And Maria realized that the apocalypse is coming, that we need to do something very quickly. And it needs to be big, it needs to be radical to save the world she loves and cherished, not for some imaginary people, but for the future of her two children that she really loves and cares about. So Władek and Maria, they look like personifications of general climate skepticism and climate activism. But when we take a closer look, it is actually based on a very precisely defined set of values. And a lot of them, by the way, are shared. They both love tradition. They both are very family oriented. They are both afraid of rapid changes. But if we limit their images into just one value, climate, yes or no, they are put into very different camps. So to finish this and start your discussion, the workshop part, maybe it would be nice to start with something concrete and precise. You're probably all aware of this policy, which has been introduced in many European cities to ban fuel cars or diesels from city centers or from whole cities. And these are real headlines from the press. None of them are written by Władek or Maria, but some of them would be very attractive for Władek, others for Maria. And maybe we could start with thinking, what would Władek think about these policies? How would he perceive them? How are they in connection or disconnection with his values? What would his reaction be? And what would Maria's reaction be? And then starting from this, we could start thinking together how we can communicate this to build some kind of bridge and to make it easier for them to work together. Thank you very much, and back to studio.